We're closing our 4-part series on tax by stepping back and looking at the biggest picture of all. Not the individual, not the business, not politics, but the economy. From an economic perspective, tax is not emotional and not ideological, it's structural. Tax is one of the main tools governments use to shape how an economy grows, how capital moves, and how value is distributed over time. When economists look at tax, they don't ask, is this fair? They ask, what does this do to behavior at scale? Because tax decisions today don't just affect next year's budget, they shape economic outcomes for decades. At the economic level, tax directly influences growth. Growth comes from production, investment, innovation, and consumption. Tax touches all four. If taxes on labor are high, working becomes less attractive. If taxes on capital are high, investment slows. If consumption taxes rise, spending decreases. None of these effects are instant, but over time they compound. Economies with very high overall tax pressure often grow more slowly, not because tax is bad, but because incentives matter. On the other hand, economies with very low tax revenue struggle to invest in infrastructure, education, and stability. Roads, courts, schools, healthcare, and digital infrastructure don't build themselves. So economically, tax is always a balancing act. Too much tax slows growth, too little tax weakens the foundation that growth depends on. One of the most important economic roles of tax is behavioral steering. At scale, small incentives change massive outcomes. When governments lower tax on investment, capital flows increase. When they tax pollution, consumption patterns shift. When labor is taxed heavily, informal economies grow. Economies don't respond emotionally, they respond predictably. People and businesses adjust behavior based on incentives. That's why economists often say, don't listen to what people say, watch what tax policy makes them do. It's about control and steering. Over time, tax shapes where people work, how businesses structure, what industries grow, and what skills are developed. From an economic perspective, this matters a lot. Investors don't just look at tax rates, they look at tax certainty. A country with a slightly higher tax rate but a stable, predictable system often attracts more long-term investment than a country with low tax but constant rule changes. Economically, uncertainty is more damaging than taxation itself. And that's why tax reform shocks markets. It disrupts forecasts, valuation, and confidence. The trust is gone. Over time, economies that constantly change tax rules discourage capital formation. And without capital formation, growth slows, regardless of how low the headline tax rate is. From an economic lens, tax is one of the primary tools for managing inequality. Market economies naturally concentrate wealth. Capital earns returns. Assets grow. Extremely unequal economies experience lower consumption, higher instability, reduced long-term growth, so tax policy often tries to reduce inequality with breaking incentives. And that balance is one of the hardest economic challenges any country faces. One of the biggest misconceptions in economics is that low tax equals success. In reality, stability matters more than rates. Economies thrive when people can plan, when businesses can forecast, when investors can trust the rules. A stable tax system allows long-term contracts, infrastructure investment, human capital development, but high volatility destroys those things. That's exactly why some of the most stable economies in the world maintain moderate tax levels with clear enforcement, not extremes. Tax policy shapes the character of an economy. It influences whether an economy is production-based or consumption-based, whether innovation is rewarded or discouraged, whether capital stays or leaves. Economies with clear, balanced tax systems tend to develop strong middle classes, stable institutions, predictable growth, while on the other hand, economies with chaotic or overly aggressive tax regimes tend to experience capital flight, informal economies, slower development. Tax doesn't determine success alone, but it sets the environment in which success is possible. Economically, tax is not about maximizing revenue, it's about optimizing outcomes over time. So from an economic perspective, tax is not punishment and not charity. It shapes incentives, behavior, investment, and trust. In this series, we looked at tax from 4 angles: the individual, the business, the political system, and the economy as a whole. Each angle explains a different story, but together they explain why tax exists, how it functions, and why it's so central to modern society. Understanding tax doesn't mean agreeing with every policy. It means understanding the system you operate in and how it influences your decisions, your businesses, and your future. Thanks for watching. My name is Remco Coerman, and this is the Coerman class, Finance and Business School, sponsored by Epic Edges. See you in the next series.